No other non-political institution reached more individuals in antebellum America than the Methodist Episcopal Church, and 15,000 of its members joined the abolitionist secession within 2 years. This is a quote from an article by Chris Paget titled Hearing the Anti-Slavery Rank and File, the Wesleyan Methodist Schism of 1843. It comes from a spring article in the 1992 Journal of the Early Republic. He goes on to state that a fuller understanding of abolitionism's influence can come only with careful consideration of its constituency. Methodists occupied a significant place among the movement's rank and file. Many of them were obscure in their own day and have largely escaped historical attention. So, in the mid-1840s, abolitionism was gaining traction that coincided with the rise of the Whig Party. The Whig Party came at a time when Jacksonian democracy was the leading political party in America. And so just as political parties were beginning to splinter and new ones were beginning to form, so too were various denominations in the church, and this coincided with the rise of the abolitionist movement. While abolition was a sect within the Whig Party, not all Whigs were abolitionists, and in fact, one of the most famous Whigs, Henry Clay, was an ardent anti-abolitionist. Henry Clay was a congressman who is notable for his involvement in the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act, as well as the Compromise of 1850, which ended up just kicking the can of slavery down the road. Both of these were events where slavery became a flashpoint in Congress, and Henry Clay, a prominent Whig, was influential in moving that issue right along. So the same was true within churches all across America. Many people among churches were abolitionists, however many were not. And this led to a divide among congregations, which is where we see the emergence of the Wesleyan Methodist Church. In a quote from an article called Clay Faces in an Abolitionist Church, the Wesleyan Methodist Church in Syracuse, New York, which was written by Douglas Armstrong and Lou Ann Wurst in a 2003 issue of the Historical Archaeology Journal, they state that in the case of Methodists, the debate focused on the abolitionist leaning of some pastors who used their pulpits and other public venues to lecture against slavery, even though the official church position did not condemn the institution. These ministers felt that Methodism should follow the lead of John Wesley, who in 1774 had clearly stated his opposition to human bondage. Wesley wrote that slaveholding was not consistent with any degree of natural justice, mercy, and truth. So just like the members of the leaders of the Protestant Reformation divided from Catholicism in the Protestant Reformation, so too in the mid-1800s do we see a divide among these Protestant American churches, where the abolitionists are spurring on this divide from the churches of the day. In a book titled Doctrines and Discipline of the Wesleyan Methodist Church, we see the leaders of this secessionist movement in the church lay out their primary reasons for splintering from the church. They say the seceders from the Methodist Episcopal Church in Michigan at their organization adopted the discipline of the Wesleyan Methodist Church of Utica, New York, with slight alterations. The following are principal reasons that led to the secession and ultimately to the formation of a church under the above name. Number 1, the existence of slavery in the Methodist Episcopal Church. The persons forming the Wesleyan Methodist Church believed slavery, under all circumstances, to be a heinous sin against God, and therefore could not conscientiously remain in fellowship with a church in which so horrible a crime was practiced by many of its members and ministers. Declared to be not a moral evil by whole conferences of its preachers, and openly connived at and virtually sanctioned by its General Conference, the source and authority of its power. The next article in the document goes on to discuss the issues that the secessionists had with the episcopacy of the Methodist Church. However, their primary concern was with its anti-abolitionist sentiment. So this brings us to the Wesleyan Methodist Church's involvement in the Underground Railroad. In a quote from the same article above, Clay Faces in an Abolitionist Church, the authors go on to state that there is a great deal of information that links many of the Wesleyan Methodist Church members in the Underground Railroad. Research indicates that the church was utilized as a station and that the congregation was actively engaged in assisting refugees in transit to Canada. Moreover, members of this congregation were active in public and their opposition to the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, indicating that the individuals in Syracuse practiced abolition and were willing to flaunt federal law when they deemed it necessary. So this brings us to a man by the name of Luther Lee. He was a key founder of the Liberty Party in the mid-1830s and 40s. He became a key abolitionist leader. He initially was a Methodist preacher who was ostracized for speaking out against slavery. During the 1830s, he and his wife went on the circuit speaking against abolition, against temperance, and against women, and about women's rights, not against it. And he began organizing with other abolitionist Methodists. They set up a conference in Utica, New York in 1843, and that's where the Wesleyan Methodist Church was officially formed. He became the first pastor of the Syracuse Wesleyan Methodist Church and the editor of the True Wesleyan newspaper, which helped facilitate the Underground Railroad. And this brings us to the story of a man by the name of John McHenry. John McHenry, he was a former slave who had escaped and eventually made his way to Syracuse, New York in the 1840s, in the 1850s. And at the time that Daniel Webster, who was another prominent congressman, a leader, along with Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, he came to Syracuse to speak out against anti-slavery. This is because Syracuse, again, being the location of the Wesleyan Methodist Church, was known across the nation as a strong hotbed of abolitionist sentiment. So Daniel Webster, he came to speak against it and stated that, dependent upon it, the law will be executed in its spirit and to its letter. It will be executed in all the great cities, here in Syracuse, in the midst of the next anti-slavery convention, if the occasion shall rise. So it was at this anti-slavery convention, a convention of the Liberty Party and the Methodist Church, that news came out that Jerry McHenry, the slave who was living in Syracuse, he had been arrested and was going to be sent back to his owner, who was trying to prosecute him and bring him back to him. So while they were at this anti-slavery convention, many of the members of the Methodist Church and the anti-slavery movement heard about his arrest. And so they got together in a mob, they stormed the jail where he was being held and freed him. And eventually he was removed from the city. So the denomination that I chose, the Methodist denomination, specifically the Wesleyan Methodist denomination, was crucial in American history by being a main proponent of the anti-slavery movement of the mid-1840s and 1850s. By helping to spur on the abolitionist movement, it led to the abolitionist movement being one of the crucial factors as the Civil War went on, to being one of the main things that was a term of surrender for the South in the Civil War. If the abolitionist movement hadn't been as strong as it was throughout the 1840s and throughout the 1850s, with the help of denominations such as the Wesleyan Methodist movement, we may not have seen President Abraham Lincoln issue such things as the Emancipation Proclamation. We may not have seen generals such as Grant be as strong proponents of abolition and of helping the cities that they liberated throughout the Civil War and getting rid of slavery. And we may not have seen the post-Civil War era be as focused on Reconstruction as it was. So I think the Methodist, specifically the Wesleyan Methodist Church denomination, had an immense impact on America. Thank you. One other thing I would like to add is that the document I mentioned, The Doctrines and Discipline of the Wesleyan Methodist Church, that book was penned by Wesleyan Church members from Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is approximately 30 minutes from where I live. So that was another thing that made me interested in this denomination in particular.